Have you ever felt like your heart was speaking, but no one was really listening? Not even the one you were trying so hard to reach. It's a quiet kind of ache, the kind that stretches through the silence of unread messages, the waiting that turns into weeks, the smile you force when someone asks, "Are you okay?" And maybe, just maybe, you've whispered to yourself, "If I love enough, if I give enough, maybe he'll stay." Somewhere along the way, many women learn to equate being loved with being chosen, and being chosen becomes a survival instinct, a desperate attempt to confirm a worth that should have never been questioned. That's how it begins. Not with drama, not with fireworks, but with the slow, invisible erosion of self-respect, with small compromises, with unanswered texts, with pretending you're fine when inside, everything is screaming. You don't beg with words, you beg with silence, with patience that bleeds, with a love so loud it drowns your own voice. The deepest wound isn't the rejection itself. It's the belief that you weren't enough to be kept, that something in you made him turn away. And that's where the child inside you rises, the one who once associated love with approval, presence with performance, affection with being perfect. That child still hopes someone will stay, still hopes that if you love hard enough, long enough, deep enough, you won't be left again. But there is something you need to hear, not from me, but from the part of you that you've silenced for too long. Louise Hay once said, "I no longer need to beg for love. I am love." Let that sink in, because begging is not love. It's a betrayal of your own essence. A woman who begs forgets her light. She forgets that love isn't something to be earned through self-erasure. It's something to be reflected from within. You do not have to audition for someone's affection. You do not have to shrink to fit someone's capacity to receive you. Think of a flower reaching desperately toward the sun, stretching, twisting, exhausting itself to be seen, and yet it forgets. The light it seeks is already within. It was never about chasing the sun. It was about trusting the seed, trusting the soil, trusting that she was made to bloom without permission. True love, as Clarissa Pinkola Estes reminds us, is presence. To love means to stay with. To stay with means to learn to be present in the soul. The love you deserve doesn't ask you to beg. It doesn't withhold affection to maintain control. It doesn't disappear so you learn to miss it. Real love, the kind that nourishes rather than depletes, reveals itself to the woman who stops abandoning herself in pursuit of crumbs. And that's where your story begins to change. Not in the moment he stays, but in the moment you stop asking him to. The moment you stop begging is the moment you remember who you are. The emotional exhaustion of pleading for crumbs. There comes a moment when exhaustion doesn't look like falling apart. It looks like smiling through the ache, apologizing for needing too much, and pretending that crumbs of affection are enough to keep your soul alive. You sit there, holding your phone, staring at a silence that echoes louder than any argument ever could. You tell yourself he's just busy, that you're asking for too much, that maybe if you just wait a little longer he'll come around. But deep down, you feel it, the emptiness, the quiet heartbreak of begging for the bare minimum and calling it love. When a woman begins to plead for the smallest signs of care, a reply, a gesture, a look, what she's truly pleading for is a reflection of her own worth. But love that comes through pleading isn't love. It's survival wrapped in hope. It's fear dressed up as devotion. It drains. It depletes. It dismantles everything sacred within you. And every time you ask for less just to keep someone around, you whisper to yourself that you're not worth more. Louise Hay offers a gentle but powerful truth. I am willing to release the need to feel unworthy. There is something deeply spiritual about this release. It is not weakness. It is not giving up. It is waking up. Waking up to the reality that love is not a transaction you negotiate through emotional exhaustion. Waking up to the truth that anything that makes you feel less than is not love. It is a pattern, a wound, a lesson still repeating itself until you learn to say, enough. The exhaustion you feel isn't because you love too much. It's because you keep trying to earn something that should flow freely, and it never does. Not when you have to beg for it. Not when you have to shrink for it. Not when you have to betray yourself for it. That kind of love comes with a cost, and the price is always your peace. And perhaps the deepest exhaustion isn't even in the asking. It's in the waiting. Waiting for a change that never comes. Waiting for him to notice, to care, to finally give you what you keep sacrificing for. But what if the change doesn't come from him? What if it comes from you? The moment you decide you are worthy of more than crumbs. Let's walk a little deeper. Because the roots of this pattern stretch far beneath the surface. The invisible contract. If I give more, he'll stay. There's a silent agreement many women sign without even knowing it. An invisible contract born from old fears and childhood wounds. It says, if I love harder, if I give more, if I become what he needs, then he won't leave. But that contract is written in pain, not truth. It's a script handed down through generations, whispered into our hearts by mothers who stayed too long, by fathers who were never fully there, by the culture that teaches women to earn love instead of receive it. And so she tries. She overcompensates. She anticipates his moods, minimizes her needs, molds herself into something softer, smaller, more agreeable, not because she lacks love, but because deep down, she believes love must be bought with sacrifice. That staying is proof of her value. That silence, when he withdraws, must mean she didn't do enough. This invisible contract always begins in childhood. Maybe you were praised only when you were helpful. Maybe affection came when you performed, achieved, obeyed. And slowly a belief took root. Love is conditional. Love is earned. Love is a reward, not a right. So you became the giver, the peacemaker, the one who bends instead of breaks, because bending felt safer than risking abandonment. But that pattern, that contract, does not protect you. It imprisons you. It convinces you that if he leaves, it's your fault. That if he stays, it's because you've done something right. It turns love into a performance. And in that performance, you disappear. The tragedy is not that he doesn't see you. It's that you stopped seeing yourself. What would happen if you tore up that contract? If you began to believe that love isn't something you have to earn, perform for, or beg to receive? What if love simply is, and your only task is to stay true to the woman you are when you're not trying to be enough for someone else? The pain of not being chosen is real, but deeper still is the pain of continuously choosing someone who keeps you questioning your worth. Now let's look at what happens when love turns from a presence into a performance, when it stops being sacred and starts being strategic, when love becomes a transaction, not a truth. There's a moment, quiet but piercing, when you realize you've been loving like a negotiator, not a soul fully present. It often comes after another evening where you gave everything and received almost nothing, after you sent a message that went unanswered, after you canceled your plans to make space for him, and he never even noticed. That's when it hits. This doesn't feel like love. It feels like bargaining, like constantly proving you're worth staying for. When love turns into a transaction, it starts to resemble anxiety. You begin to weigh your words, to monitor your emotions, to count how many times you reached out first. You live in the tension between giving and hoping, between pleasing and waiting. And somewhere, buried beneath all that effort, is a woman who just wants to be seen, not managed, not measured, just met with presence. She gives, and gives, and gives, hoping that one day it will be enough. But when love becomes about earning, it becomes exhausting. When affection must be bought with silence, patience, and self-sacrifice, it stops feeling like love and starts feeling like self-erasure. This dynamic is especially cruel because it mimics hope. It tells you, just a little more, just a little longer. But what it really does is keep you looping in uncertainty, postponing your own peace. That's not love. That's an emotional contract rooted in fear, fear of loss, fear of being alone, fear that without him you'll disappear. Real love is not a test you have to pass. It doesn't demand that you audition for a role in someone else's life. It doesn't ask you to shrink, to chase, to mold yourself into what someone else will finally choose. Real love sees you. It doesn't barter with your soul. It honors it. And when you begin to wake up to this, when you start to feel the weight of all the proving, all the pretending, something within you starts to whisper, this can't be all there is. And that whisper is the beginning of your return to yourself. But what happens next, when the woman who always runs after love finally stops? Let's walk into that moment, because everything begins to shift there. The day you stop running after love is the day it finds you. There's a quiet revolution that begins the moment a woman chooses to stop chasing what doesn't recognize her worth. It doesn't happen with anger. It doesn't require a dramatic farewell. It begins in stillness, in the sacred pause where she says, no more. No more asking for the bare minimum. No more reshaping herself to be digestible. No more proving that she's worthy of what should have been offered freely. When you stop running after love, something in you realigns. You begin to feel the ground beneath your feet again. You remember that your presence isn't something to be earned. It's a gift. That your time, your tenderness, your truth, they are sacred offerings, not bargaining chips. And in that remembering, a deep power returns. A power that doesn't shout. It doesn't chase. It simply is. There's something magnetic about a woman who chooses herself. A woman who no longer waits to be chosen. Her energy shifts. She no longer apologizes for her depth. She no longer tries to fit into hearts that were never ready to hold her. She becomes sovereign. And in that sovereignty, something beautiful happens. The right kind of love begins to notice. Not because she chased it, but because she became it. This isn't about playing hard to get. This is about being hard to forget, because you're no longer willing to forget yourself. The woman who stops begging begins to select. She begins to discern. She no longer accepts attention as a substitute for affection. Presence becomes her new standard, and anything less than truth begins to feel hollow. You don't have to chase what's aligned with your soul. Love, real love, doesn't require you to abandon yourself. It arrives when you're rooted, when your energy is no longer scattered in search of validation, when your silence says more than your pleas ever did. And that day, the day you stop running, is the day you start returning to your intuition, to your wholeness, to the love that lives within you, waiting to be honored. But even then, there are moments when the old question returns. Why not me? Let's explore that question through a story, one that may feel uncannily familiar. The woman who always asked, "Why not me?" until she asked, "Why me?" again. She was the kind of woman who gave everything, not because she didn't know her worth, but because she believed love required proof. Every relationship became a silent exam, and she kept handing in her heart like it was homework waiting for a grade. Over and over, she found herself in the same pattern, the same withdrawal, the same questions, and always, the same ache when things fell apart again. For years, she carried the question, "Why not me?" It echoed through every goodbye, every unanswered message, every cold shoulder. She would look at the mirror, her reflection tired but still hopeful, and wonder what she was doing wrong. Was she too intense, too available, too much? But one day, the question shifted. Not because she found someone who stayed, but because she finally stayed with herself. The new question was quieter, but deeper. Why me? Again. Why was she choosing partners who mirrored her wounds, not her worth? Why was she drawn to those who couldn't love her back? Why was her love so freely given to those who never knew how to hold it? And in that pause, something cracked open. She saw the truth, that the love she kept chasing wasn't love at all. It was a repetition, a reenactment of old stories, old hurts. She wasn't falling in love. She was falling into familiarity, into abandonment that felt like home, into dynamics that mirrored a childhood need to be enough, to be chosen, to be seen. The turning point didn't come with anger. It came with compassion, for herself, for the girl who tried so hard, for the woman who deserved so much more. She stopped blaming the men who couldn't love her, and instead began healing the parts of her that still believed that was all she deserved. That was the day she stopped asking why they didn't choose her, and started asking why she kept choosing pain disguised as possibility. And when that question took root, her entire landscape changed. Because it's not about being loved by another. It's about loving yourself enough to stop repeating what hurts. But even with that awareness, there's still a deeper truth to uncover. That the act of begging isn't love at all. It's something else entirely. Let's open that next. Begging isn't love. It's a trauma response. There's a truth so tender, so difficult, that many women hesitate to speak it aloud. The act of begging, for a text, for attention, for reassurance, isn't rooted in love. It's rooted in pain. It's not romance. It's remembrance. A reenactment of an old ache, of a moment long ago when someone important failed to show up, when your tears were too loud, or your needs too big, and instead of being held, you were told to quiet down. So you learned to ask quietly, to love quietly, to ache quietly. Begging is not about this man. It's about what he awakens. That raw, unspoken fear of not being enough. That fear lives in the body. It lives in the nervous system. It flinches at silence. It aches at delay. It panics when love feels distant, even for a moment. It's not because you're weak. It's because your heart remembers. The nights you cried yourself to sleep. The times you were told you were too emotional. The relationships where your presence was tolerated but not truly treasured. So when he pulls away, you lean in. Not because you don't know better, but because a part of you believes this time, if you're good enough, he'll stay. That part isn't foolish. She's just wounded. She's just waiting for the apology that never came, the one that says, you were never too much, you were just too alone with it all. Louise Hay, with her gentle wisdom, reminds us, I am safe. It is only change. But to a nervous system shaped by inconsistency, change doesn't feel safe. It feels like danger. That's why you may cling to what hurts, because at least it's familiar. At least you know how this pain ends. But love, true love, doesn't live in panic. It doesn't require hypervigilance. It doesn't keep you guessing. Love feels like exhale, like warmth in the chest, like coming home, not losing yourself. To beg for love is to abandon the sanctuary of your own soul. It's to whisper to the universe, I'll give up pieces of me. Just let him stay. But staying that costs your self-respect isn't love. It's re-traumatization. It's the past wearing a new face. The good news is, the moment you name this, the moment you say, this is not love. This is fear. You begin to reclaim something sacred, your ability to self-soothe, to choose again, to stand in your worth, even when your heart is trembling. But what keeps this pattern alive? What convinces you to stay in a story that hurts? It's time we talk about false hope, the most seductive trap of all, the false hope that keeps you in the same loop. There's a quiet kind of hope that doesn't liberate. It traps. It's the kind that whispers, just wait a little longer. He'll come around. It's the kind that turns years into cycles, love into longing, and a woman's heart into a waiting room. False hope wears the costume of faith, but underneath, it's fear. Fear of letting go, fear of starting over, fear that this is the best it's going to get. You hold on, not because it feels right, but because walking away feels like failure. You tell yourself he just needs time, that he's scared, that love takes patience. But behind those stories is a deeper story, one you learned long ago, that love is something you must fight for, that you must prove yourself worthy of staying. So you stay, not because it's working, but because leaving would mean admitting it never was. And that illusion, that if you love hard enough, wait long enough, give endlessly, he'll finally choose you, is the very thing that keeps you from choosing yourself. It's not hope, it's hunger. The hunger to be seen, the hunger to be valued, the hunger to be met where you truly are. And hunger, when not met with nourishment, becomes suffering. The most painful part isn't that he doesn't love you the way you deserve. It's that somewhere deep down, you already know this, but you override your knowing. You mute your intuition. You silence the part of you that says, this is not it, because you're afraid that letting go means being alone. But what if holding on is what's keeping you lonely? You were not born to wait on the doorstep of someone else's awakening. You were not created to be an option in someone's emotional confusion. And yet, this false hope tells you otherwise, that your worth will finally be proven if he stays. But what if staying isn't the win? What if the true victory is in not staying where love is conditional? You are not here to repeat the same pain in different forms. You are here to remember, to return, to rise, because deep within you is a knowing that real love doesn't arrive through sacrifice. It arrives through alignment. And when that knowing takes root, your energy begins to shift. You stop proving, you start protecting. That's the next chapter in this journey. The moment you stop asking to be seen and begin safeguarding your soul. Let's step into that together. The shift, from proving your worth to protecting your soul. There comes a turning point. It doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Often it begins quietly, in the middle of another lonely night, or in the calm after yet another unresolved conversation. It comes when you feel that familiar ache and realize you're tired, not just physically, but soul tired. Tired of fighting for space in someone's heart. Tired of proving you're enough. Tired of asking to be chosen. That moment marks a sacred shift. It's not dramatic. It's not loud, but it's powerful. It's the moment a woman stops seeking validation and begins safeguarding her spirit. She no longer sees her love as something to earn points with. She sees it as sacred, and starts treating it that way. She stops handing it out to those who can't hold it. She stops apologizing for her depth, her needs, her intuition. And in that shift, something profound begins to unfold. Her energy changes. She's no longer available for emotional discounts. She's no longer trying to fit into spaces that make her feel small. She understands that the love she gives is precious, and not everyone is meant to receive it, especially those who make her doubt it. When a woman begins to protect her soul, she becomes magnetic, not because she's trying, but because she's no longer leaking her power. She becomes clear, calm, rooted. She's not waiting for someone to call. She's not checking who watched her story. She's not playing games with her own worth. She's living from it. There's a quiet defiance in this shift. It says, I will no longer perform for love. It says, I will not abandon myself to keep you comfortable. It says, I choose me, not in arrogance, but in remembrance. Because she remembers now. She remembers that love was never meant to be earned. It was meant to be shared, between two whole beings, not one who gives everything while the other takes without capacity. This is not bitterness. This is healing. This is a return, a realignment, a reconnection with the sacred space within. And when she chooses to protect that space, she no longer feels the urge to chase anyone, not because she doesn't feel, but because she finally feels herself. And from that place, from that grounded knowing, love finds her, but not before she finds herself. Now, let's speak about what truly happens when she no longer abandons herself in the name of being loved. Because the shift becomes complete only when she comes home, to herself. Love doesn't arrive after you beg. It arrives when you stop leaving yourself behind. There's a moment, subtle but sacred, when a woman stops waiting to be loved and starts becoming love itself. She no longer begs for presence. She becomes present with herself. She no longer waits to be seen. She starts seeing herself clearly, wholly, perhaps for the first time in years. This is not arrogance. This is return. A homecoming, a remembering. For so long, she made room for others, in hopes they would make room for her. She gave from an open heart, but too often at the expense of her own peace. And what did it leave her with? Longing, silence, a love story that sounded beautiful in her head, but hollowed her out in real life. But something changed, not in him, in her. She stopped chasing conversations that never led anywhere. She stopped rereading the messages, reinterpreting the silences, reopening wounds just to feel something. She stopped asking, will he love me? And started whispering, do I love me? That's when the tide turned. When a woman stops leaving herself behind, stops abandoning her needs, her body, her intuition, something ancient reawakens. She becomes whole again, not because someone rescued her, but because she stopped walking away from herself. And in that wholeness, love becomes something new, not a craving, not a transaction, but a reflection. Real love doesn't arrive through desperation. It arrives through resonance, and that resonance can only emerge when you are in your fullness, not fragmented, not pretending, not performing. The kind of love that finds you there doesn't make you smaller. It expands you. It honors you. It meets you where you are, not where you had to reduce yourself to be accepted. This is the paradox. When you stop begging, you stop blocking. When you stop abandoning yourself, you start attracting what aligns with who you truly are. Because the universe doesn't respond to what you say you want. It responds to who you are being. And when who you are is a woman who remembers her worth, her light, her boundaries, love arrives. Not because you chased it, but because you made space for it by becoming the very thing you were looking for. And now, everything begins to make sense. Everything painful, everything silent, everything unanswered. It all led here, to the beginning of your return. She didn't stop loving. She just stopped imploring. There is a peace that settles in when a woman stops asking to be chosen. It doesn't mean she closes her heart. It means she finally opens it, to herself. She doesn't grow cold. She grows clear. Clear about what she will no longer allow. Clear about the sacredness of her presence. Clear about the love she carries. Not the kind that pleads, but the kind that pulses from within. The day she stopped begging wasn't loud. It didn't come with a slammed door or a dramatic exit. It came quietly, like dawn. It came with a breath she hadn't taken in years. It came with the realization that she no longer needed to be smaller to be loved, that her softness wasn't a weakness. It was a sacred gift, not to be thrown into voids that couldn't receive it. Louise Hay, in her deep, Gentle wisdom reminds us, I approve of myself. I deserve to be loved simply because I exist. And when a woman finally believes that, the begging ends, not because the longing disappears, but because she no longer confuses longing with love. She walks forward not with bitterness, but with reverence. Reverence for the woman she has become, for the girl she once was, for the path she had to walk to reclaim her voice, the one that says, I will not be unseen anymore. Clarissa Pinkola Estes tells us, a woman must go into the forest of her soul and sit in the ashes of what once was, and she has. She sat with the ruins, she sat with the echoes, she sat with the truths that once felt unbearable, and she rose from them. She knows now. What she once called love was often a rehearsal of abandonment, a search for what was never hers to hold. But now, she holds herself, and that changes everything. Think of a temple, quiet, sacred, unshaken. No one knocks wildly on its doors. It doesn't beg to be visited. It doesn't open for those who come to take. It welcomes only those who arrive with reverence. That temple is you, and you no longer need to convince anyone to kneel at your altar, because your worth is no longer up for negotiation. If you have found yourself in these words, know this. The begging ends when remembering begins. Remember who you are. Remember what you carry. Remember that you were never meant to live on emotional scraps. And now, I want to leave you with one final question. A question that isn't meant to be answered with logic, but with presence, with softness, with soul. What happens when you stop begging for love? You become the woman who no longer accepts crumbs, because she remembers she was born to be whole. And if you're ready to continue this journey of remembrance and return, stay with me. There's another video waiting for you right here on the screen, a next step into the kind of love that begins within and changes everything.